My name is Proctor Zres Vorn, and in 3,000 cycles of service, I have never once doubted the exam. Until today. Until her. The alarm reached me while I was calibrating the observation lattice. A candidate had arrived. A human. My two assistants, young officers barely past their first molt, began to laugh before I even read the file. I did not laugh. Laughter is what came before mistakes, and I had learned across a very long life that mistakes in this chamber were not the kind one survived. I pulled up the candidate profile on the glass display. Her name was Alina Marsh. She was 34 standard years old by her own planet's measure. She was a teacher of mathematics and a researcher of how minds think about thinking. She had no mechanical parts inside her body, no neural attachments, no memory boosters, no chemical aids. She was, by every measure the concordance recognized, one of the most ordinary creatures ever to request entry into the sovereign cognition exam. My younger assistant, a pale green officer named Trell, leaned over my shoulder and made a clicking sound that passed for amusement among our kind. He asked how long I thought she would last. I did not answer him. I was still reading. The first contact notes from the human homeworld were strange. Unlike most species files, which gave tidy lists of strengths and weaknesses, the humans had been marked with a long string of words that read more like warnings than descriptions. Emotionally unpredictable, cooperatively illogical, prone to humor in situations of great danger, refuses to accept stated limitations. That last line was underlined in the report, which meant a first contact officer had felt it was important enough to emphasize by hand. I had read many species files in my career. I had never seen that particular warning before. Trell was still making his clicking sound. I turned slowly and looked at him with the full weight of my 8 eyes. He stopped clicking. I told him to prepare the chamber. I told him to run the safety checks 3 times, not twice. I told him that whatever he thought he knew about this candidate, he should forget it before she stepped through the door, because assumptions were how proctors ended their careers early. He bowed and hurried away. I sat alone with the file for a long moment. The exam had been built across 40,000 cycles by the finest minds of the concordance. It was not merely difficult. It was designed, very carefully and very deliberately, to find the precise point at which any sapient mind would break. Some species broke from exhaustion, some from paradox, some from the weight of emotions they had never learned to carry. Some from the cold, empty silence of the null section, where meaning itself became a test of survival. The exam was a mirror held up to the mind, and most minds could not bear what they saw. Only 3 in every 100,000 candidates passed. Of those, most required a lifetime of preparation. Monks, scholars, the chosen ones of their entire civilizations, raised from infancy for this single moment. And now, here, walking down the corridor toward my chamber, was a woman who taught mathematics to teenagers on a small blue planet, carrying what her file described as a cup of hot bitter liquid called coffee. I heard the door slide open behind me. I turned. She was smaller than I expected. Humans always were, I suppose, but there was something about this one that made her seem even smaller. She wore a dark green sweater. Her hair was brown and tied back with a simple cloth band. She carried a steaming paper cup in her left hand and a worn leather bag over her right shoulder. She looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong building and was about to ask for directions. She looked at me, she smiled. She said, "I hope I am not late. The transport took longer than I thought." I told her she was on time. My translator carried my voice across to her in her own language. She seemed pleased by this, as if meeting a proctor from the Concordance Cognitive Bureau were a small, pleasant surprise rather than the most important event of her life. I asked her if she was prepared. She tilted her head and thought about the question. Then she said, "I don't know. I suppose I will find out in there." She lifted her paper cup slightly. "Is it all right if I bring this in? It helps me think." I should have said no. The rules were very clear about outside materials. But something about the way she asked, so simply and without any trick, made me say yes before I had even considered the question. She thanked me. My assistant Trell returned with the sealed chamber key. He stared at her for longer than was polite. She smiled at him too. He almost dropped the key. I led her to the entrance of the chamber. The door was a slab of quantum-stabilized crystal, and it hummed faintly as we approached. Through the door, the chamber waited. A small room, no larger than her office on Earth, but inside that room, time bent and thought sharpened into a blade, and the walls listened to every beat of the candidate's heart. It was the most dangerous room in the known galaxy, and most who entered it came out changed, if they came out at all. I explained the rules. I told her the exam had 12 sections. I told her each section tested a different capacity of the mind, and that she was permitted to attempt them in any order she wished, though almost all candidates chose to go in sequence because the later sections assumed completion of the earlier ones. I told her that the internal clock would give her 72 hours of subjective time, though the external clock would move only a few seconds. I told her that if she wished to stop, she need only speak the word withdraw, and the chamber would release her at once, and no shame would be recorded against her name. She listened carefully. She nodded at each point. When I finished, she asked me only one question. She asked, "What happens to the people who do not pass?" I was quiet for a moment. I told her the truth. I told her that some of them emerged unable to speak for a long time afterward, that some emerged changed in ways that required great care from their families and their physicians, that some did not emerge at all, their minds lost inside the chamber, though their bodies were recovered and returned home with honor. She nodded slowly. She did not look afraid. She looked thoughtful, the way a person looks when they are being told a sad story about someone they have never met. She said, "Thank you for telling me the truth. Most people try to soften that kind of thing." She stepped toward the door. She paused. She turned back and looked at me. She said, "Proctor Vorn, I have one thing to ask. If I do not come out, would you make sure someone tells my grandmother that I loved her very much and that I thought of her at the end? Her name is Margaret. She lives in a town called Dover. She is 91 and she makes the best apple pie in the world." I did not know what to say. No candidate had ever asked me anything like that. They had asked about their scores, their rankings, their chances. They had asked about glory. They had asked about their place in history. They had never asked me to carry a message about apple pie to an old woman. I told her I would. I told her I promised. She smiled at me again. A different smile this time. Smaller, more private. The smile of someone who had just been given a small but precious gift. She said, "All right then, let's see what you have built." She walked into the chamber. The door slid shut behind her. The seals engaged. The observation lattice lit up, showing me her outline in soft blue light against the chamber walls. I sat down at the observation station. Trell stood beside me, silent now. His clicking was long gone. The chamber hummed to life. The internal clock began to tick. The first question of Section 1 appeared on the wall before Elena Marsh, projected in light, written in her own language, a question designed to tangle the minds of creatures who had spent 10,000 cycles preparing for it. Elena Marsh sat down on the single chair provided. She set her cup of coffee on the floor beside her. She reached into her leather bag and pulled out, of all things, a yellow pencil. A simple wooden pencil, the kind I had seen in first contact photographs of human schoolchildren. She looked at the question. She laughed. Out loud. She laughed in the exam chamber. I heard Trell make a small strangled sound beside me. I did not move. I did not speak. I watched her pick up her pencil and begin to write, in handwriting so messy that my translator struggled to parse it, right across the surface of the chamber wall where her answer was meant to appear. She wrote quickly. She paused. She tapped the pencil against her cheek. She wrote again. She crossed something out and giggled at herself and wrote it a different way. She looked, for all the world, like a university student working through a puzzle at a kitchen table on a quiet Sunday afternoon. In the corner of my display, the external clock had not yet moved. Not by a single tick. She finished the first question. I watched her read her own answer, nod slightly as if approving of her work, and turn her attention to the second question. The second question was the one that had undone the great Zelnari philosopher Kashvaran in the last cycle, a seven-layered paradox about the nature of self-awareness in systems that observe themselves. Kashvaran had stared at it for 40 internal hours before quietly asking to withdraw. Elena Marsh looked at it for perhaps 10 seconds. Then she wrote 3 words on the wall. She underlined them. She moved on. I leaned forward in my seat. My carapace made a faint sound against the chair. Trell whispered something I did not quite hear. I asked him to repeat it. He said he thought she was cheating. He said it must be some kind of trick. He said no mind could work this fast, not even the great calculators of the Brennan Hive Republic. I told him to be quiet. I watched her work. She moved through the first section the way a person walks through a garden they have visited many times. She knew where the paths turned. She knew which flowers to stop and look at and which ones to walk past. She had not prepared for this exam, not in any way the concordance would recognize, but somehow, in her small, ordinary life on her small blue planet, she had already done the work. By the end of what would have been the first hour for any other candidate, she had finished Section 1 entirely. She stood up, she stretched. She picked up her coffee, took a sip, and made a small face because it had gone slightly cold. She sat back down. And then, because I am telling you the truth, and I will not soften it, she did something I have never seen any candidate do in 3,000 cycles. She opened Section 2 and began writing small notes in the margins of the questions. Little comments, little observations. My translator caught some of them as she wrote. Next to one question she wrote, "Oh, this one is clever." Next to another she wrote, "Whoever designed this must have been tired that day." Next to a third, simply cute. Trell was making a sound now like a small animal that had been stepped on. I could not make him stop. I could barely breathe myself. The external clock had still not moved. She was annotating the exam. She was annotating the most difficult examination in known space, as if it were a homework assignment from one of her students, and she had been asked to give it kind but honest feedback. I watched her work. I watched her drink her cold coffee and laugh quietly at her own notes, and tap her pencil against her cheek and solve problem after problem that had been designed across 40,000 cycles, to be unsolvable by any mind that had not been trained for a lifetime. And I understood in a slow, terrible, wonderful way that I was watching something that had never happened before. Not in my career, not in my predecessor's career, not in the career of any proctor ever recorded. I was watching a human being, with no training and no preparation, holding a cup of cold coffee and a yellow pencil, taking apart the exam the way a child takes apart a puzzle on a rainy afternoon. And she was only on Section 2. She had 10 more to go. And the clock still had not moved. I leaned back in my seat. I did not know whether to feel afraid or amazed. Perhaps both. Perhaps they were the same thing when the mind had no frame left to hold them. I did the only thing I could think to do. I opened a secure channel to the Bureau. I requested an emergency review board to observe the remaining sections in real time. The senior clerk on the other end asked if there was a problem with the candidate, a failure state, a breach of chamber protocol. I told her no, there was no failure, there was no breach. I told her we were going to need a bigger observation room, because what was happening inside that chamber was going to change the concordance, and I was the only one watching it so far, and the human, the small woman with the pencil and the cold coffee, had not even finished her first morning of work. I turned back to the display. Elena Marsh had just finished Section 2. She was reaching for Section 3. She was smiling. Section 3 arrived on her chamber wall in shifting colors and strange geometric forms. It was called the paradox of mirrors, though the humans would have no way of knowing that name. It was a section designed by a committee of 16 species over a period of 4,000 cycles. Its purpose was to give the candidate a series of logical statements that appeared perfectly sound, each one leading into the next, until the candidate realized, usually around the 10th statement, that the entire structure was built on an impossibility. At that point, most minds froze. They could not accept the contradiction. They could not reject it either, because every individual step had been logically valid. They simply stopped, stuck between two truths that could not both exist. I had seen candidates sit in front of this section for entire subjective weeks, unmoving, unspeaking, trying to find a way through a wall that had no door. Alina Marsh read the first statement. She nodded. She read the second. She nodded again. She read the third and then the fourth, and by the seventh she had set down her pencil entirely and was simply watching the statements appear on the wall with the calm attention of a person watching a film. When the 10th statement appeared, she smiled. She did not freeze. She picked up her pencil. She flipped to the back of her answer sheet. She wrote one single sentence, closed the sheet, and stood up to stretch. I could not read her answer from my station. The chamber only revealed answers upon section completion. But I saw the section scoring lattice begin to resolve, and my 8 eyes widened as the green pass indicator lit up across every metric. Trell had now stopped making any sound at all. He was perfectly still, the way young officers become still when they suddenly understand that something much larger than their training is happening in the room with them. I opened the backdoor channel to the scoring system. I wanted to know what she had written. I knew I should not look. Proctors are forbidden to read answers during the exam, but I could not stop myself. Her answer was 4 words. The mirror has dust. That was all. 4 words. She had looked at the grand paradox, the structure of logical impossibility that had undone 10,000 minds across 40,000 cycles, and she had simply noted that the mirror reflecting everything was itself imperfect, that there was a smudge on the glass, that the entire paradox assumed a clean reflection, and if the reflection was not clean, the paradox did not close, and the mind could walk right through the gap. It was such a simple answer. It was such a small human answer. It would not have occurred to any of my colleagues in 1,000 cycles. We did not look for dust on mirrors. We built the mirrors. We did not think to question whether they were clean. I sat back in my chair. I felt something moving in my chest that I had no name for, something warm and uncomfortable. I think, looking back, it may have been the first moment I began to love her, though I would not have used that word at the time, and I am still not sure I have the right to use it. Alina Marsh was already reading Section 4. Section 4 was called the Empathy Cascade. This one I had always hated. It was cruel in a way the other sections were not. The chamber would generate, through careful neural projection, the emotional experiences of 1,000 suffering beings, and it would pour those experiences into the candidate's mind all at once. The purpose was to test whether a mind could hold the emotions of others without losing itself, whether it could feel everything without being swept away. Most candidates tried to shield themselves. They tried to build walls. The walls always failed. You cannot wall off 1,000 griefs at once. The force of them collapses the barrier and the mind underneath. A few candidates tried to process the emotions like data, to catalog them, to sort them into categories. That also failed. The emotions did not want to be sorted. They wanted to be felt. The Vressel Collective, a species known for their deep compassion, had sent 3 of their finest adepts to this section across the last 10 cycles. All 3 had emerged unable to speak for months afterward. Alina Marsh sat in her chair. The projection began. The emotions started to flow into her mind. I watched her face through the observation lattice. I saw her breathe in slowly. I saw her close her eyes. She began to whisper. At first my translator could not catch what she was saying. I adjusted the sensitivity. The words came through. She was nomming them, not by number, not by type. She was giving each emotion she received a small human description. She was saying things like, this one is missing someone she loved very much. This one is cold and tired and has been cold and tired for a long time. This one is angry at a parent who never said the right words. This one is a child who does not understand why the other children will not play with her. This one is an old person who is afraid of being forgotten. She did not sort them. She did not shield herself. She did not process them as data. She sat with them. That was the only way I could describe it. She sat with each one. She acknowledged it. She let it be what it was. And then she let it move on, the way a kind host greets a guest at the door and shows them into the warmth, and then, when the guest is ready to leave, walks them back to the door and wishes them well. She did this 1,000 times. She did it in what would have been, for any other species, a physical impossibility. The rate of emotional input was far greater than any sapient processing speed we had ever measured. And yet she did not rush. She did not skip any of them. Each one received its moment of recognition. When the last emotion passed through her, she opened her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. She sat quietly for a long moment, as if the room itself needed a pause. Then she picked up her coffee, now completely cold, took a small sip, and turned to Section 5. I realized that I had not been breathing. I drew in a long, rattling breath. Trell beside me was crying, which was strange because our species does not produce tears in the same way humans do. But there was a clear fluid running down his face plates, and he was not wiping it away either. Perhaps he had learned something from watching her. Section 5 was the temporal distortion puzzle. The chamber began to stretch and compress time in uneven patterns inside itself. A minute would pass in a blink. An hour would pass in a minute. A second would stretch into what felt like a full day. The candidate had to solve a sequence of mathematical problems while their sense of time was being shredded. Elena Marsh was a mathematician. I had forgotten for a moment. I watched her begin the puzzles and I remembered. She worked through them the way a musician plays a song they know by heart. Her hand moved across the wall in small, quick motions. The pencil marks flowed like water. The temporal distortion did not seem to affect her. Or rather, it affected her, but it did not trouble her. She seemed to enjoy it. At one point, when time stretched out long and slow, she actually leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for what must have felt to her like an afternoon, and then opened her eyes again when it passed and went right back to work. She treated time the way she seemed to treat everything else, as a thing to be noticed and respected and then moved through, not a thing to be fought. Section 6 was the multidimensional logic trap. Section 7 was the recursive identity problem. Section 8 was the silence that speaks. Section 9 was the 1,000-year question. She moved through each of them. She moved through each of them without pause. My display kept showing the external clock. The external clock had moved by exactly 1 tick in all this time. 1 tick. A tiny flickering second of real-world time, while inside the chamber, Elena Marsh had worked through what would have been 3 internal days of the most challenging material ever designed by sapient minds. I had to open a second secure channel to the Bureau. I told them we had a situation. I told them I needed a full senior review panel assembled, and I needed it now. The senior clerk this time was an older officer named Mindris Krell, a veteran I had trained with long ago. She asked me in a calm voice what the nature of the situation was. I told her we had a human in the chamber who was passing every section faster than our instruments could measure. I told her the clock had barely moved. I told her I did not know what to do. Mindris was quiet for a long moment. Then she said in a voice that was not quite steady, "I am coming. I will bring others. Do not stop her. Do not interfere. Let her finish what she has started." The channel closed. I turned back to the observation lattice. Elena was reaching the halfway point. She stood up again and stretched. She walked a small circle around her chair. She rolled her shoulders. She took another sip of coffee, made the same small face at how cold it had become, and then laughed softly to herself as if sharing a private joke with her coffee cup. Then she sat back down and opened Section 10. Section 10 was the null section. It was the one I had always considered the most terrible of them all. The chamber went dark, completely dark. There was no light, no sound, no input of any kind. The neural dampeners engaged, suppressing every external stimulus. The candidate was left alone with their own mind in the deepest possible silence. The purpose was simple. The candidate had to generate meaning from nothing. They had to prove that their consciousness could produce coherent thought without any external anchor. Most minds could not do this. Most minds, deprived of input, began to hallucinate within minutes. Within hours, they began to fragment. Within a day, they either produced acceptable output or they crossed a threshold from which many never fully returned. Elena Marsh sat in the darkness. I could see her only through thermal imaging now. She was a small, warm shape on the display. She was quiet for a long time. Then she began to hum. A soft melody, something from her planet, something her grandmother must have hummed to her when she was small, perhaps. A lullaby, a folk song. I did not know. My translator could not identify it because it was not a language. It was just sound, warm and simple and unhurried. She hummed for what must have been hours of internal time. Then she began to speak, softly, to herself. She began to tell herself a story. It was a simple story. It was about a girl who lived on a blue planet and looked up at the stars at night. The girl wanted to know what was out there. The girl grew up. The girl became a teacher. The girl taught other children about numbers, because numbers were one of the few languages that reached across the dark between the stars. The girl never stopped looking up at the sky. She never stopped wondering. And one day, a ship came from the stars, and it asked for a volunteer, and the girl raised her hand. Because she had spent her whole life getting ready for a question she did not know anyone would ever ask. Elena Marsh told herself this story in the dark. She was not performing it for me. She did not know I could hear her. She was telling it to herself, the way humans sometimes do when they need to remember who they are. The null section sensors began to behave strangely. The meaning density readings began to climb past the normal threshold, climb past the upper limit, climb past the theoretical maximum the section had ever been designed to measure. The section began to overflow. I had never seen this happen. I did not even know it was possible. The chamber itself was buckling slightly around the edges of its readings, as if Elena Marsh were pouring more meaning into the void than the void could hold. Alarms began to trigger, soft, gentle alarms, the kind that were never meant to go off. Trell looked at me with a kind of terror. I waved him to silence. The null section issued the pass indicator. Elena Marsh had completed it in what my instruments now recorded as the fastest time in the entire history of the exam. The chamber returned to normal lighting. Elena opened her eyes. She wiped a tear from her cheek, smiled a small private smile, and reached for section 11. Behind me, the doors of the observation room slid open. Mindress Krell entered, followed by 6 senior officers of the Bureau. They stopped in the doorway. They stared at the lattice. No one spoke. Elena Marsh picked up her pencil. She began to write. And the external clock in all this time had moved by only 3 ticks. Section 11 was called the question of the self. I had always thought it was misnamed. It should have been called the question of the many, because the section did not ask the candidate who they were. It asked them who they were not. The chamber projected, one by one, versions of the candidate, possible selves, selves that had made different choices, selves that had been cruel when they were chosen to be kind, selves that had been lazy when they had chosen to work, selves that had given up, selves that had broken promises, selves that had become the worst things a person could become. Each possible self was rendered in perfect detail, with a full history and a full interior life, and each one stood before the candidate and asked a single question. Why are you not me? The correct answer was not to hate these selves. It was not to deny them. It was not to reject them as not being part of the candidate. The correct answer was to acknowledge that every one of those selves lived inside the candidate as possibility, and that choice, daily quiet choice, was what had led the candidate to this chair, and not to any of those other lives. Most candidates panicked. They tried to say they were better than those other selves. The The chamber rejected that answer. They tried to say those selves were not real. The chamber rejected that too. A very few managed to say, in essence, I could have been you, but I was not, and I am still not, and I am responsible for that difference every single day. Those candidates passed. Elena Marsh watched the first alternate self appear before her. I could see the projection through the lattice. It was a version of her that had given up on teaching, that had become bitter, that had let her life become small and closed and angry. It stood before her and it asked her, "Why are you not me?" Elena looked at this version of herself for a long moment. She said, "I almost was you. There was a year when I almost became you. I remember it. I remember how close I came." She reached out her hand, not to push the other self away, to welcome it. She said, "Come sit with me. You are tired. You have been carrying a lot." The alternate self seemed confused. It had been designed to challenge. It had not been designed to be invited to sit down. Elena said, "I am not afraid of you. You are part of me. You are not the worst thing I could have become. You are just a version of me who did not get lucky the way I got lucky, who did not have the right friend at the right moment, who did not sleep enough for 1 week too many. I am sorry I did not become you. I am also grateful I did not become you. Both of those are true." The alternate self flickered. It grew less solid. It looked for a moment almost surprised, and then it faded. Another self appeared. This one was crueler. This was a version of Elena who had become the kind of person she had always feared. Sharp-tongued, quick to anger, dismissive of her students. She looked at this one longer. Her jaw tightened a little. I saw something pass across her face that I did not have a name for. She said, "You are harder for me. I will not pretend you are not. There were years when I was closer to you than I like to admit. I said things I should not have said. I was cold when I should have been warm. I have apologized for some of it. I have not apologized for all of it yet." She paused. She said, "I am trying to do better. I am not perfect at it, but I see you. I know you are in me. I am not going to pretend you away. I am just going to keep choosing not to be you, one day at a time. That is all I can promise." The alternate self was quiet. It looked at her for a long moment. It nodded once. Then it faded too. Elena Marsh faced version after version of herself. Some were easy. Some were hard. Some made her cry. She did not rush through any of them. She gave each one its time. She did not deny any of them. She did not hate any of them. She met each of them with honesty and with a kind of tired affection that seemed to come from somewhere very deep inside her. The chamber had never seen this before. The scoring system, which was designed to accept correct answers, did not know what to do with a candidate who was not just passing, but was apparently comforting the exam itself. Behind me, Mindress Krell sat down slowly in an empty chair. I heard her whisper, "What is this? What is she?" I could not answer her. Elena reached the final alternate self. This one was different. This one was the version of her that had not gone into the exam, the version that had stayed home, that had said no when the concordance invitation had come, that had kept her quiet life on her small blue planet and had never risked anything. That version looked the happiest of all of them. Elena looked at her for a very long time. I saw her hand shake slightly. She had not shaken through any other section. She was shaking now. She said, "I envy you. I want you to know that. I envy you so much it hurts a little." She took a breath. She said, "But I could not have been you, because if I had said no, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering, and that wondering would have turned the quiet life into something else. It would have rotted it slowly. You look happy, but I think, a year from now, you would not be. I think you are the version of me who has not yet felt the regret coming, and I do not want to be you when it arrives." She reached out her hand again. She said, "Take care of yourself. I hope you find something else to say yes to." The alternate self smiled at her, a small sad smile. It faded. The chamber was empty again. Elena Marsh sat alone in her chair. She let out a long, slow breath. She picked up her coffee. She did not drink it. She just held it in both hands, warming her fingers against its cold ceramic. The section lattice lit up green. She had passed section 11. There was one section left. Section 12. The one no candidate had ever described afterward. The one those who failed could not describe because they were not the same people when they came out. The one those who passed refused to describe out of a respect that was close to reverence. The mirror. I had watched many candidates face the mirror. I had never grown used to it. It was the section where the chamber showed the candidate the complete uncurated truth of their own interior life. Every memory they had buried, every cruelty they had committed, every shame they had carried, every fear they had hidden, every small dying they had pretended was not a dying, every person they had failed, every version of themselves they had tried to outrun. It was designed to be unbearable. It was designed to break even the strongest minds. And the point was not that a candidate should not feel pain. The point was that the candidate, faced with the full uncurated truth of their own self, should not turn away. Most minds turned away. Most minds could not do otherwise. Elena Marsh opened section 12. The chamber changed. The walls became reflective, not like mirrors exactly, more like the surface of water at night. Things moved inside them, memories, small moments from a life. Some of them were bright, some of them were dark. I saw, across the reflective walls, flashes of her childhood, moments from her school years, a friend she had failed to stand up for, a cruel word she had said to her mother when she was 15 and had not apologized for until much later. A time she had not visited her grandfather before he died because she had been tired and busy and had promised herself she would come next weekend, and next weekend had been too late. I saw a failed love, not a dramatic one, a quiet one, a man she had almost married and had pulled away from because she had been afraid of what it would mean to be known. I saw his face. I saw her face as she had broken it off. I saw her walk out of his apartment and cry on the street. I saw smaller things too, moments of smallness, a time she had lied about why she was late, a time she had taken credit for an idea that had not been entirely hers, a time she had walked past someone who needed help because she had been in a hurry, a time she had said something unkind about a coworker and been caught in the hallway by someone who heard, a time she had been a bad friend, a time she had been a worse daughter. I saw as well the deepest things, the fears she had carried, the grief she had not yet let herself fully feel about her mother's death 4 years earlier, the small loneliness that had lived inside her since she was a child, the quiet terror that she was not enough, that she had never been enough, that she would die someday and not have made a mark, and the worst terror underneath that one, which was the terror that she would die and the mark she had made would have been a harmful one. Every candidate I had watched face the mirror had, at some point, looked away. It was simply too much. The chamber asked for a kind of honesty that the living self spent most of its time avoiding. To meet it all at once was to meet a tide. Elena Marsh did not look away. She sat in her chair. She let the images flow across the walls around her. She watched each one. She let each one arrive. She did not flinch. She did not justify. She did not explain. She said softly, "Yes, I remember." She said it again. "Yes, I remember. I am sorry, I remember." Over and over, to each memory, to each small darkness, to each failure. Not defending, not rejecting, just acknowledging. "Yes, I remember. I am sorry." And then, near the end, when the deepest things came, the grief and the fears and the terrors that she had not spoken aloud even to herself, she did something I had not seen any candidate do in the mirror. She spoke to them. She said, "I know you. I have met you before. I have met you many times in the middle of the night, in long drives by myself, in the quiet moments when I thought no one was watching. You have come to visit me my whole life. I know you are part of me. I am not angry at you anymore. I am not fighting you anymore. You are welcome here. You can stay as long as you need." The mirror began to do something I had never seen. It began to dim. The reflective walls grew softer. The images grew gentler. It was as if the chamber itself did not know what to do with a mind that had already made peace with the thing the chamber was designed to reveal. Elena Marsh stood up from her chair. She walked to the wall. She reached out her hand. She touched the mirror. She said, "You are not my enemy. You are just the parts of me that I have not yet made friends with. We have a little more work to do, you and I, but not today. Today I have done enough. Today I am telling you, thank you for being part of me. Thank you for helping me know who I am." The mirror went still. It was no longer a mirror. It was a wall, a simple, smooth wall. The section reported its completion. The scoring lattice did not light up in green. It lit up in a color I had never seen before, a soft, warm gold. Behind me in the observation room, no one was speaking. No one was moving. Mindress Krell had her hands over her mouth. Two of the senior officers were crying. Trell was looking at the floor, very still. Elena Marsh walked back to her chair. She sat down. She looked very tired. She also looked, somehow, lighter. As if she had set something down she had been carrying her whole life without knowing it. She picked up her answer packet. She gathered up her notes. She reached into her bag and pulled out a second pencil, a red one. She wrote something on the last page of the packet. She stood up. She walked to the submission slot at the front of the chamber. She placed the packet inside. The slot closed. The packet was sealed. The exam was complete. The external clock read 3 ticks. 3 ticks from the moment she had walked into the chamber. 3 seconds of external time. And inside the chamber, a woman had walked through a journey that should have taken 3 days of subjective experience for any other candidate, and she had walked through it in the slow, careful way of someone visiting a place they had known their whole life. The chamber door slid open. Elena Marsh walked out. She was carrying her leather bag over her shoulder. Her paper cup of coffee had been left behind on the floor. Her hair was a little messier than it had been when she went in. Her eyes were a little red. She looked at me. She said the exam was lovely. Please tell whoever designed it that they are trying too hard. Minds do not break when you love them enough to listen. I hope that is all right to say. I could not speak. I watched her walk across the observation room. I watched her nod politely at the senior officers, who were all staring at her as if she were something they had never seen before, which she was. I watched Mindress Krell reach out and touch her arm as she passed, not to stop her, just to make sure she was real. Elena smiled at her. She said, "It is all right, I am all right." She walked out of the observation room, into the corridor beyond. The door slid shut behind her. The room was silent. And I, Proctor Z-Res Vorn, 8th rank of the Galactic Cognitive Assessment Bureau, sat at my station with my 8 eyes very wide, and understood that everything I had believed about minds, and about the exam, and about my own work had just been changed. I reached for the submission slot. I opened it. I pulled out her packet. I turned to the last page where she had written her final note in red pencil. Her handwriting was messy. I read it twice to be sure. She had written the exam was lovely. Please tell whoever designed it that they are trying too hard. Minds do not break when you love them enough to listen. Thank you for letting me bring my coffee. Tell Proctor Vorn he was very kind. With warm regards, Elena. I held the paper for a long moment. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside my chest pocket, close to where my hearts were. And I sat at my station, and I waited for the Bureau to ask me what had happened, and I tried in the quiet to begin understanding what I had just watched. The Concordance High Assembly was in session within 3 standard days. I had never seen an emergency session called so quickly in all my years of service. Delegates from 240 species filled the great round chamber on the Assembly world. The sessions were broadcast across the entire Concordance network. Every civilization watched. The subject of the emergency session was, officially, the validity of the sovereign cognition exam. Unofficially, the subject was Elena Marsh. I was called to testify. I stood at the central podium and I told the assembly everything. I told them about her coffee. I told them about her pencil. I told them about her laughter when she saw the first question. I told them about the way she had annotated the exam, the way she had sat with the emotional cascade, the way she had spoken to the mirror. I told them about the 3 ticks on the external clock. The chamber was silent when I finished. A delegate from the Brennan Hive Republic stood up. He was a tall crystalline being whose voice always sounded like music struck from glass. He said, "Proctor Vorn, you are asking us to believe that a single unaugmented human woman from a recently contacted species has exceeded the measurement ceiling of the most difficult examination ever designed. You are asking us to believe that she did this without preparation, without training, without support. You are asking us to believe that she laughed during the paradox section." I said, "I am not asking you to believe anything. I am reporting what I observed. The chamber recordings are available for full review. The scoring data is attached to my testimony. I am merely telling you what happened." He sat down. A delegate from the Zamar Confederation stood up next. A smaller being, gray and thoughtful. He said, "What do you think it means?" I paused before I answered. I said, "I think it means we have been wrong for a very long time." The chamber began to murmur. I raised my hand slightly. I said, "We built an exam to find the limits of minds. We built it carefully. We built it honestly. We have used it for 40,000 cycles to sort species into the categories that determine their standing in our civilization. And it has worked, more or less, because most minds do have limits that can be found by pressure." I said, "But Alina Marsh did not fail any of our pressure tests because she had already, in her own small human life, done the work that the pressure tests were designed to provoke. She had already met her own darkness. She had already made peace with her own limits. She had already sat with her own grief, her own failures, her own fears. She had done it slowly across years with small human tools, conversations with friends, time spent thinking, something her species calls therapy, something they call journaling, something they call just being honest with yourself for a long time." I said, "The exam asks a candidate to face these things all at once because our assumption has always been that no mind would voluntarily face them across a lifetime. We thought the only way to force a mind to meet itself was with pressure. We were wrong. Humans meet themselves every day. Not all humans, not all at once, but enough of them for long enough to make this possible." I said, "We spent 40,000 cycles building traps for the mind. Humans spent the same time building homes for the mind. Small homes, imperfect homes, homes that leak in the rain, but homes. And the minds that live in homes cannot be trapped because they know what it is to come inside from the cold." The chamber was very quiet. I said, "I'm not asking you to love humans. I'm not asking you to give them anything. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that we have been asking the wrong question for a very long time. We have been asking how much pressure a mind can withstand. Perhaps the better question is, how well has a mind been cared for? And perhaps a civilization is not measured by how much its citizens can endure. Perhaps it is measured by how well they have learned to tend to what lives inside them." I stepped back from the podium. The chamber erupted. Voices rose. Arguments began. Delegates shouted at each other in 40 languages. Some demanded that humans be placed under quarantine until they could be properly studied. Some demanded that humans be granted Tier 1 citizenship immediately. Some demanded that the entire exam system be suspended until it could be redesigned. A few, the oldest and quietest species, simply asked if they could meet Alina. The session went on for 7 standard days. In the end, the assembly voted. Alina Marsh was granted Tier 1 citizenship by a margin that was not unanimous but was sufficient. She was offered a seat on the High Council of the Concordance itself, a position that no member of a newly contacted species had ever been offered. She was offered research posts on 12 different worlds. She was offered the resources of any library, any institute, any university in the Concordance. She was given 3 days to consider her response. I waited. I did not know what she would do. On the 3rd day, a message arrived at my station. It was addressed to me personally. I opened it. It was short. It said, "Proctor Vorn, I hope this message finds you well. I received the offers from the assembly. I wanted to thank them through you because I know you. I am going to say no to most of them. I have graduate students waiting for me back home, and I have a dog named Biscuit who is staying with my neighbor, and my neighbor is getting tired of walking him. I have a grandmother in Dover whose birthday is in 6 weeks and I would like to be there. I have a small life, and I like my small life, and I do not want to trade it for a large one. The message continued. It said, I will accept the citizenship because it may help my species, and I will accept an open invitation to consult when you call on me because I think we may have useful things to say to each other across the years. But I am going home. I hope you understand. I also wanted to say, please come visit me when you have time. My grandmother would like to meet you. She has heard about you. She would like to cook you dinner. We are not sure what you eat, but she says she will figure it out. She always does. The message ended. It was signed Alina. I read it 3 times. Then I did something I had not done in a very long time. I asked for leave from my post. I was granted leave immediately. The bureau, I think, was still in a kind of shock, and they would have granted me almost anything. I took a transport to Earth. It was my first time visiting a Tier 3 world for personal reasons. The customs officers on the Earth side were young and surprised. They processed my entry quickly. They asked if I needed an escort. I told them no. I took a local transport to a town called Dover. It was smaller than I expected. It had narrow streets and old trees and houses that leaned slightly because they had been built a long time before Earth had become interested in straight lines. There was a small gray, cloudy sky above it. I had never seen a sky so soft. I found the address Alina had sent me. It was a small cottage with a red door and a garden with flowers I did not recognize. A small brown dog was sleeping on the front step. The dog opened one eye as I approached. It considered me for a moment. Then it went back to sleep. Evidently, my species was not sufficiently interesting to warrant waking up. The red door opened. An old woman stood in the doorway. She was small and bent, and her hair was very white and her eyes were very bright. She looked up at me without any fear at all. She smiled. She said, "You must be Zres. Come in, I have made stew. I do not know if you can eat stew. If you cannot, I have also made bread and cheese and fruit. I did not know, so I made many things." I stepped through the door. I had to bend very low to fit. The cottage was warm inside. It smelled of cooking and of something else, something I would later learn was called wood smoke from a small fireplace. Alina came down the stairs. She was wearing a different sweater, a blue one this time, and her hair was down. She saw me and she laughed, which is a thing she did often, I was beginning to realize. She said, "You came. I was not sure if you would." I said, "Your grandmother invited me." Her grandmother said, "Of course he came. A proper invitation to dinner is not a thing one refuses. She is teaching you, Alina. Proper manners are important." Alina laughed again. She led me into the small kitchen. The dog, Biscuit, had decided now that I was worth following, and he came after us and sat by my foot and looked up at me with an expression I did not understand. We ate dinner. Alina's grandmother, whose name was Margaret, had prepared the most remarkable spread of human foods I had ever attempted. I could eat some of it. I could not eat other things. Margaret watched me carefully and noted what worked and what did not, and she said she would remember for next time. Alina smiled at her and said, "Next time," she said, as if my visits were already a regular thing. We talked for a long time. Margaret asked me about my home world. I tried to describe it. She listened with the attention of someone who had not had many stories told to her lately and was grateful for any new ones. Alina asked me about the aftermath of the exam. I told her about the assembly session. I told her what I had said at the podium. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that was a kind thing to say. I said it was the truth. She said kind truths are still kind. After dinner, Margaret went to bed early. She said we young people should stay up and talk. I was, by my species measure, over 2,000 years old, but I did not correct her. It seemed she meant something by young that had little to do with age. Alina and I sat in the small living room. A fire was going in the fireplace. Biscuit was asleep on a rug. Through the window, I could see the stars just beginning to come out over the little English town. I asked her the question I had been carrying for many weeks. I asked her, "How did you do it?" She was quiet. She looked into the fire. She said, "I do not think I did anything. I just did not try to beat the exam. I tried to be in it. The way you would be in a long conversation. The way you would be in a walk with a friend. I do not think of my mind as something to be defended. I think of it as a place I live. And I have been learning slowly for a long time how to live there better." She paused. She said, "My mother died 4 years ago. It was not sudden. She was ill for a long time. I sat with her for the last 6 months. I watched her make peace with things, big things and small things. I watched her say goodbye to her fears. It changed me. It taught me that the work of becoming yourself is the work of a life, not a moment. There is no test you can give someone that they have not already in some way been taking every day they have been alive." She looked at me. She said, "The exam did not test me. It just showed me to myself. And I had been in the room with myself for a long time already, so there was not much surprise." I thought about this for a long moment. I said, "We will need to rebuild the exam." She said I would not rebuild it. I would stop giving it. I would ask species instead to show us how they have cared for their minds across their history, their poems, their songs, their stories, their friendships, their practices of grief, their small homes for the heart. You would learn more from a civilization's quiet habits than from any hour of pressure. I thought about this for a long moment too. I said, "I think I am going to resign from my post." She said, "What will you do?" I said, "I think I am going to study humans, not your technology, not your biology. I am going to study your quiet habits. I am going to learn what you do when no one is watching. I am going to learn how you have made peace with yourselves in all your small, messy, imperfect ways. I think there is something in it that the concordance has forgotten. Or perhaps we never knew. Perhaps we skipped past it in our hurry to be excellent." She smiled. She said, "I will help you. I am not the only human who has done this work. There are many of us. Most of us are not as lucky as I have been, but we are here. We are trying. Come visit any of us. We will talk to you. We will tell you what we know." I did not speak for a while. I watched the fire. I said, "Alina, I am very old. I have given my life to the exam. I was proud of my work. I thought it was important. And now I am here in your grandmother's cottage on a small planet, and I am wondering if I wasted a very long time." She was quiet. Then she said, "Zres, no time spent trying to understand a mind is wasted. You are looking for something important. You are looking in the wrong place. That is not a waste. That is how looking works sometimes. You find the thing by first looking everywhere it is not." I felt something in my chest move, something warm. I said, "Thank you." She said, "You are welcome. Finish your tea. Margaret will be disappointed if you do not." I finished my tea. Later, I slept on a long couch in the living room that had been made up with soft blankets. Biscuit slept on the floor beside me. I listened to the small noises of the human cottage, the fire settling, the wind against the windows, the old clock on the mantel ticking in a rhythm that was almost like breath. In the morning, Margaret made breakfast. There were eggs and toast and a sweet red preserve made from berries. Alina came down in a robe and drank coffee from a proper cup this time, not a paper one, and she smiled at me and said, "This is a better cup of coffee," and I understood that she was making a small joke about the chamber, and I laughed, which is something I had not done in a very long time. I stayed for 3 days. I met some of her students who were polite and curious and asked me many questions. I met her friends, who brought over food and beer and sat in the garden and argued loudly about politics and literature. I met her brother, who lived in a nearby town. I met her old neighbor who had been walking Biscuit. I learned things I did not know I needed to learn. I learned that humans spend a great deal of time doing apparently useless things that turn out, on closer inspection, not to be useless at all. They sit with each other. They cook for each other. They tell each other the same old jokes and laugh every time as if they had never heard them. They forgive each other in small, repeated ways. They remember birthdays. They hold grudges and then slowly, without ceremony, let most of them go. They tend to their minds. They tend to each other's minds. They do it all the time. They do not even notice they are doing it. On the fourth day, I returned to my transport. Alina and Margaret came to the station to see me off. Margaret gave me a jar of her apple preserves, wrapped in cloth, which she said I should eat if my stomach agreed with it, and which I should keep as a souvenir if it did not. Alina gave me a small book. It was old. It had been her mother's. I asked her what it was. She said it is poetry. I do not know if your species writes poetry. I think you might like it, or you might not, but I wanted you to have it. I took the book. I put it carefully inside my coat. I boarded the transport. I looked out the window. I saw the two of them standing on the platform, an old woman and a younger woman, small and ordinary and luminous in the way of small, ordinary things. I waved. Alina waved back. Margaret waved too, more slowly, as if waving were a thing she had almost forgotten how to do. The transport lifted off. I returned to my station. I submitted my resignation 2 days later. The Bureau accepted it, though they asked me to remain available as a consultant, which I agreed to do. They also asked me to write a full account of what I had observed in the chamber, and of my subsequent visit to Earth, and of my conclusions. They asked me to take my time. I have been writing it ever since. I sit now, many cycles later, in a small office on a quiet world where I have chosen to spend my final years. I have studied humans. I have learned much. I have not learned everything. I do not think I will learn everything before I die. But I have learned enough to know that the Concordance has much still to learn, and that we will be better when we learn it. Alina and I remained in contact across the years. She visited the Concordance a few times in a consulting role when we were trying to rebuild the exam. She was helpful. She was also insistent that we should not rebuild it at all. In the end, we reached a compromise. The old exam was retired. A new assessment was developed, one that looked not for the limits of a mind, but for the care that a civilization had taken with its minds. Species began to be invited to share their practices. Their grief rituals, their forms of friendship, their ways of making peace with themselves. The Concordance became, slowly, a different kind of place, not a better place in every way, but a gentler one. Margaret died 7 years after my first visit. I attended her funeral. I stood in a small gray churchyard in Dover with Alina and her brother and her friends and her students, and I did not entirely understand the ceremony. But I understood that she was being loved one last time by people who had loved her their whole lives, and I understood that this was a thing the Concordance had never quite learned how to do. Alina is still alive. She is older now. She still teaches. She has new students every year. She still drinks coffee from paper cups. She still carries a yellow pencil in her bag, though she rarely uses it. Biscuit the dog passed on long ago. There is a new dog now, a smaller one named Pickle. I have not yet met Pickle in person. I will meet him on my next visit. I keep Alina's note from the exam in a small frame on my desk. The red pencil has faded slightly over the years. The paper is yellowed, but the words are still readable. The exam was lovely. Please tell whoever designed it that they are trying too hard. Minds do not break when you love them enough to listen. Thank you for letting me bring my coffee. Tell Proctor Vorn he was very kind. With warm regards, Alina. I read it most mornings. I think often about those 3 ticks of the clock, 3 seconds of external time. It is a small measure. It means very little in the great span of the Concordance. And yet, inside those 3 seconds, a woman walked through a journey that changed everything I thought I knew, and she walked through it carrying a paper cup of coffee, and she handed back the exam that was designed to break minds, and she walked out into the corridor and went home. She handed it back before the clock moved. But the clock, I have come to understand, was always the wrong thing to measure. The clock was a small instrument. The mind was a larger thing. The care of a mind, across a lifetime, across a civilization, across generations of small, ordinary kindnesses, was the largest thing of all. We had been measuring the wrong thing. She had simply gently shown us. And then she had gone home to walk her dog. That is the story. That is what I saw. That is what I learned. I am glad I learned it, even if it took me 3,000 cycles to find the room where the lesson was waiting. I am grateful to her. I am grateful to Margaret. I am grateful to a small blue planet that had never thought of itself as important enough to write down its small methods for tending the self, and that turned out to hold in those methods something the great civilizations of the galaxy had not yet found. I sign off now. My report is finished. My service is complete. This is Zres Vorn, formerly of the Bureau, now simply a student of quiet things. With warm regards.